It was an overcast autumn day when Mila, Darius, and Anka received a cryptic letter. All three friends had grown up in the small town of Raznov, surrounded by the dense forests and looming Carpathians, but it had been years since they last visited. The letter read simply, "Return to the lake house, it awaits you." None of them remembered a lake house, but the handwritten note bore the distinct handwriting of Anka's grandfather, a man who had disappeared when they were children. Strangely compelled, they decided to investigate. When they arrived, the air seemed colder, and the forest was silent, as if even the birds dared not disturb the peace of the abandoned lake. The lake house sat in quiet ruin, beside still waters that held no reflection. When the three stepped inside, it felt as if the house was swallowing them whole. Mila, ever the skeptic, joked nervously, while Darius examined the mold-covered walls. But Anka, noticing strange symbols scrawled on the floor, remained silent. A whisper, soft as the wind, seemed to brush against her ear, "It's been so long." Once inside, the trio realized that the lake house was far larger than it appeared from outside. Hallways twisted, leading into rooms they couldn't recall from a moment earlier. Rooms shifted and reappeared in new places as if the house itself were alive. Darius laughed nervously, thinking it was an elaborate prank. But Mila pointed out something even stranger. Each room contained objects they vaguely remembered from childhood, a broken toy, a worn book, an old pair of glasses. "What, is this place?" Anka asked, her voice shaky. But no one had an answer. As they moved deeper into the house, a sickening smell pervaded the air. Old, damp wood mixed with something like decaying earth. It was as if the lake itself had seeped into the house, flooding its foundations with a rancid odor. Then, the door they had entered through was gone. No matter which way they turned, every door they opened led them only further into the labyrinthine interior of the lake house. As night fell, they noticed the temperature dropping drastically. A faint mist began to coil around their ankles, creeping out from the darker corners of the rooms. Mila felt an invisible weight pressing against her chest, and every breath became harder to take. Whispers echoed around them, indistinct but eerie, as if shadows were breathing life into long-forgotten voices. Anka, driven by some unknown force, stumbled across an old journal in a room lined with dusty shelves. The entries were scrawled in her grandfather's handwriting. They spoke of something called the Lake's Pact and warned of an entity that demanded loyalty, feeding off those who dared to break its curse. Darius reached for a candle on a shelf to get a better look, but as he lit it, a chilling gust of wind extinguished the flame immediately. Mila grabbed Darius's hand in fear, her face ashen. In the corner of the room, a shadow twisted, and with a voice that seemed both ancient and young, it whispered, "Leave while you can, or join us beneath the water." Driven to find a way out, the three moved back down a narrow hallway, hoping to find a door, a window, anything that would lead them outside. But every step brought them closer to the basement. They didn't know how they knew it was the basement, none of them had seen stairs before, yet here they were, descending into the darkest part of the house. In the basement, the air was colder, thick with the damp stench of rotting wood and stagnant water. The walls were covered in a dark substance that seemed to pulse faintly, and puddles formed beneath their feet, making each step sluggish and heavy. A strange force seemed to draw them forward, despite the fear gripping them. At the end of the room was a pool of water, pitch black and still. In its depths, shapes seemed to writhe, almost as if souls were imprisoned within. Mila moved closer, entranced by something lurking just below the surface. Suddenly, a hand shot up from the water, skeletal and dripping, grabbing her wrist and pulling her toward the surface. Darius and Anka pulled her back just in time, but the hand lingered just beneath the surface, beckoning them closer. A voice echoed in their minds, cold and commanding, "The lake demands its sacrifice." Racing out of the basement, they found themselves back in a familiar room, though it felt distinctly different now. The shadows seemed deeper, the walls lined with what looked like funeral urns. Anka remembered something her grandfather had once told her as a child, a legend about spirits that resided beneath the lake, waiting for the living to call them forth. As she shared this memory, Mila uncovered a strange, rusted key, lying on an altar with carvings that matched the symbols on the floor. With trembling hands, she picked it up, and a rush of visions assaulted her mind, memories of people she had never met, lives that had been devoured by the lake house, faces screaming silently beneath dark waters. Darius looked out one of the rare windows, realizing that the lake now appeared closer, almost as if it were expanding toward the house. In its depths, ghostly faces floated to the surface, reaching out as if pleading for release. Anka, staring at the lake, whispered, "This place doesn't just hold the past, it consumes it." With the key in hand, they frantically searched the house, seeking a way to break the curse binding the lake and its spirits. But the house seemed to fight them, rooms rearranging themselves, blocking exits and leading them back to where they'd started. Finally, they came to a door they hadn't seen before, one that appeared in a wall where there had been nothing just moments earlier. Inside was a small, circular room with walls that were damp and cold to the touch. In the center of the room was an altar with a hollow where the key fit perfectly. Anka turned the key, and a low rumble shook the room. The walls seemed to dissolve, and water poured in, submerging them inch by inch. The ghostly faces they had seen beneath the lake now surrounded them, their wails piercing and mournful. It was as if they were reliving the horrors that had bound them to the lake house. Desperate, Anka shouted into the dark water, "Let us go. We're not yours." The lake spirit responded with a cold hiss, "Once within the lake's grasp, you belong to it forever." But just as they began to lose hope, Anka remembered a line from her grandfather's journal, "To free oneself, one must offer that which the lake desires most, a soul freely given." In a moment of clarity, she took a step forward, offering herself to the shadows, hoping her sacrifice would free her friends. But before she could surrender, Mila and Darius pulled her back, holding her tightly. A blinding light filled the room, and with a sound like shattering glass, the lake spirit shrieked, releasing them as the room dissolved into mist. When the mist cleared, they found themselves outside, by the shore of the lake. The house was gone, and the lake appeared as it always had, dark, mysterious, and silent. The friends staggered away, leaving the place of horror behind, their faces pale, and their breaths shallow.